Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today, we're talking about something extraordinary, a small bone that's rewriting our understanding of human cognition, timekeeping, and yes, even women's history. This is the Lebombo Bone. It's 35,000 years old, found in the mountains between South Africa and Eswatini, and it might just be the world's oldest calendar. But here's the kicker. This isn't just about keeping track of days. This tiny artifact tells us that ancient humans, specifically ancient African women, were thinking mathematically, tracking patterns, and recording information tens of thousands of years before we thought possible. So grab a coffee, settle in, and let us explore how a bone with 29 notches carved into it is challenging everything we thought we knew about our ancestors. The story begins in the early 1970s in the Lebombo Mountains, specifically in Border Cave, which sits right on the border between South Africa and what is now Eswatini, formerly known as Swaziland. This cave has been a gold mine for archaeologists. It is one of the longest continuously occupied sites in human history, with evidence of habitation going back over 200,000 years. Among the thousands of artifacts found at this site, tools, beads, evidence of early art, and symbolic thinking, archaeologists discovered a small fibula bone from a baboon. It was about 7 centimeters long, roughly the size of your finger, and it had 29 deliberate notches carved into it. Now, you might be thinking, okay, notches on a bone, so what? But remember, this bone was found in layers of sediment that have been precisely dated to 35,000 years ago. That's 35 millennia. That's before the last ice age ended, before agriculture, before pottery, before writing, before pretty much everything we associate with civilization. And yet, someone took the time to carefully carve 29 marks into this bone in a deliberate pattern. The question is, why 29? Here's where it gets really interesting. The number 29 isn't random. A lunar month, the time it takes for the moon to go through all its phases, is approximately 29.5 days. The notches on the Lebombo bone correspond almost perfectly to this cycle. This suggests that 35,000 years ago, someone was tracking the phases of the moon. They were observing the sky, recognizing patterns, and recording them. This is abstract thinking. This is mathematical reasoning. This is science. But there's another theory that's even more fascinating, and it relates specifically to women's experience. The average menstrual cycle is also about 28 to 29 days. Many researchers, including anthropologist Francesco De Rico, believe the Lebombo bone may have been used by women to track their menstrual cycles. Think about what this means. If this interpretation is correct, then women 35,000 years ago were not only aware of the cyclical patterns in their own bodies, but they were recording them, tracking them, predicting them. This is reproductive health management from the Stone Age. Whether it's a lunar calendar, a menstrual calendar, or both, because let's be honest, the connection between the two has been recognized across cultures for millennia. The Lebombo bone represents sophisticated cognitive ability. It shows planning for the future, pattern recognition, and the invention of a recording system. And this wasn't happening in Europe or Asia. This was happening in southern Africa 35,000 years ago. The Lebombo bone is part of a larger picture that's emerging from archaeological research in Africa. For too long, the narrative has been that complex human behavior, art, symbolic thinking, mathematics, planning all originated in Europe during the Upper Paleolithic period, maybe 40,000 years ago. But evidence from Africa keeps pushing these dates back further and further. We now have evidence of ochre processing and possible paint making from 100,000 years ago in South Africa, shell beads used for personal adornment from 75,000 years ago, engraved ochre, and ostrich eggshells showing abstract patterns from 70,000 years ago, and now mathematical notation, and timekeeping from 35,000 years ago. The Lebombo Bone fits into this pattern. It shows that the people living in southern Africa weren't just surviving, they were thriving intellectually. They were curious about the world around them. They were solving problems. They were creating systems to track and record information. Imagine the person who made this bone. They lived in a world we can barely comprehend, megafauna still roaming, ice sheets covering huge portions of the globe, no cities, no agriculture, living in close connection with the natural world. And yet, they had the same brain we have, the same capacity for wonder, for pattern recognition, for innovation. They looked up at the night sky and saw patterns. They paid attention to their own bodies and saw cycles. And they thought, I should record this. So they picked up a bone and a sharp tool, and they carved 29 notches, creating what might be humanity's first calendar. Here's something that doesn't get talked about enough. Africa is the birthplace of humanity. Homo sapiens emerged in Africa somewhere between 300,000 and 200,000 years ago. We spent the vast majority of our existence as a species on the African continent before migrating to other parts of the world. And yet, when people think about ancient human achievement, they often think of Europe first: cave paintings in France, Venus figurines in Austria, stone tools in Germany. There's this persistent bias that positions Europe as the center of human cultural evolution. The Lebombo Bone, along with countless other African artifacts, challenges this Eurocentric narrative. It says, look, the innovation was happening here first. The abstract thinking, the art, the mathematics, it's all rooted in Africa. This matters for several reasons. First, it's simply the truth, and truth matters. Second, it challenges racist narratives that have portrayed Africans as somehow less innovative or intelligent. And third, it reminds us that human genius isn't concentrated in any one place or people. It is a universal human trait that manifests whenever and wherever humans have the opportunity and need to innovate. The legacy of that ancient person carving notches into a bone 35,000 years ago continues today in African scientists, mathematicians, and innovators who are pushing the boundaries of human knowledge. The thread is unbroken now. Let's put the Lebombo Bone in context with other ancient timekeeping devices, because I know some of you are thinking about other famous calendars. The Ishango bone, which we've covered on this channel before, is from the Democratic Republic of Congo and dates to about 20,000 years ago. It also shows mathematical notation and possibly lunar tracking. So we have multiple examples from Africa of very ancient mathematical thinking. The Sumerian calendar, often cited as one of the oldest formal calendars, dates to around 5,000 years ago. The Egyptian calendar, about the same, maybe 5,000 years old. The Chinese calendar system, around 4,000 years old. Even Stonehenge, which some believe had calendrical purposes, is only about 5,000 years old. The Lebombo Bone predates all of these by tens of thousands of years. It's not even close. Now there is one other contender for world's oldest calendar, a series of pits found at Warren Field in Scotland that may have tracked lunar months, dating to around 10,000 years ago. That's impressive, but it's still 25,000 years after the Lebombo Bone. The point isn't to play a game of who was first, although let us be honest, Africa was first. The point is to recognize that the human drive to understand and track time is ancient, universal, and deeply rooted in practical needs, whether that as tracking seasons for food gathering, phases of the moon for hunting, or menstrual cycles for reproductive health. So, what can a 35,000-year-old bone teach us today? Actually, quite a lot. First, it reminds us that women's knowledge and women's intellectual contributions have always been part of human history. If the Lebombo Bone is indeed a menstrual calendar, It represents women's scientific observation and record keeping from the Stone Age. Women weren't passive recipients of knowledge. They were actively creating it, documenting it, passing it down. Second, it challenges us to think differently about primitive peoples. The people who lived 35,000 years ago weren't less intelligent than us. They had the same brains, the same capacity for abstract thought. What they lacked was accumulated knowledge and technology, but they were just as clever, just as curious, just as innovative. Third, it is a reminder that African contributions to human civilization aren't just ancient history, they lay the foundation. Mathematics, astronomy, timekeeping, art, symbolic thinking, all of these have deep African roots. When we talk about human achievement, we need to start the story in Africa, because that's where the story actually begins. And finally, it's humbling. This little bone, smaller than your phone, carved with simple notches, has survived 35,000 years. The person who made it is long gone, their name lost to time, their face unknown. But their creation remains, telling us across the vast expanse of time, I was here. I was thinking. I was curious. I was human, just like you. The Lebombo Bone isn't just an artifact, it is a bridge connecting us to our ancient ancestors. It's proof that human curiosity, mathematical thinking, and the desire to track and understand patterns in nature have been with us for far longer than we ever imagined. It is also a reminder that the most important stories in human history don't always come from the places we expect. They come from mountains in southern Africa, from caves in the Congo, from sites across a continent that has given humanity so much and received so little credit in return. If you enjoyed this deep dive into ancient African innovation, make sure to hit that subscribe button. We are on a mission to uncover the stories that textbooks leave out, to give credit where credit is due, and to show that human history is far richer and more complex than the simplified narratives we've been taught. Drop a comment below. What ancient African innovation should we explore next? And if you haven't already, check out our videos on the Shango bone and the Nok culture's iron revolution. There's so much more to discover. Thanks for watching, and remember, history is always deeper, older, and more African than you think. See you in the next one.